tecnología de dron nos va a permitir facilitar la toma de decisiones cuando sucedan eventos catastróficos. En este caso estamos evaluando inundaciones. Entonces los drones nos van a permitir generar imágenes para luego fácilmente poder identificar áreas, porcentajes de afectación con unos niveles de detalle muy importantes para las comunidades.
Básicamente vamos a utilizar dos tipos de drones. Tenemos uno que es un dron de ala rotatoria, es de 4 hélices, el cual posee una cámara tipo RGB. Este dron nos va a servir muy seguramente para levantamientos de pequeñas áreas, pero si ya tenemos afectaciones, muchas afectaciones en una zona determinada o predios bastante grandes, si utilizamos otra tecnología que son los drones de ala fija. En este caso tenemos un sensor tipo multiespectral, es este dispositivo que vemos acá. Con este dispositivo vamos a lograr hacer variables cuantitativas y cualitativas, un análisis cuantitativo y cualitativo en la parte de daños y pérdidas del sector.
Entonces esta tecnología va a ser muy útil porque va a poder cuantificar de manera rápida y en grandes proporciones, rápido. No vamos a tener que caminar para llegar a un terreno. Hay terrenos que los pudimos visitar a los 20 días porque la vía de acceso habitual no estaba útil.
Aproximadamente evaluamos 400 hectáreas de afectación. Con estas hectáreas de afectación vamos a generar perfiles de los principales cultivos de la región.
La tecnología dron también me va a permitir hacer una medición del área total afectada, me va a permitir saber cuál fue el nivel de la afectación, si fue alta, media, baja sobre mis sistemas productivos, por ejemplo en distritos de riego, en infraestructura, en maquinaria. Cuando estamos hablando de evaluar daños y pérdidas, estamos hablando de tener información. Como mandatario, saber enfocar hacia dónde voy a dirigir mis esfuerzos, en dónde voy a priorizar las acciones. Entonces, en este caso, poder hacer una buena priorización de acciones y una buena implementación de acciones a nivel de reducción del riesgo, pero buenas decisiones. Y para eso, este acceso a la información es bien importante.
Esta fase del proyecto de evaluación con drones sobre los sistemas agropecuarios para identificar daños y pérdidas hace parte de las 4 herramientas y estrategias que tiene el desarrollo del Sistema Nacional de Daños y Pérdidas que estamos diseñando para Colombia. En el mundo, nuestros colegas de Filipinas han generado un precedente con relación a tifones que afectan los sistemas agropecuarios. En Colombia estamos generando el primer piloto y lo que queremos recuperar de estos casos exitosos es justamente cómo proveer a las comunidades que más lo necesitan unos lineamientos. Con estos lineamientos, las alcaldías y las oficinas de riesgo y las secretarías de agricultura van a poder entender y poder trazar una ruta en donde fácilmente entiendan cuál es esa posibilidad del uso de la tecnología de dron para la evaluación de sus daños y pérdidas.
Vamos a poder empoderar a los municipios, a los consejos municipales de gestión del riesgo sobre cómo podemos seguir incorporando el tema de riesgos agropecuarios en la gestión del riesgo a nivel general.
Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Es un gusto darles la bienvenida.
Good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the webinar, New Technologies to Anticipating Hazards and Responding to Disasters, the first of a series of 3 on risk management and resilience in agriculture. My name is Ana Ricoy, and I am Disaster Risk Management Officer at the FAO Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. And today I will be moderating this webinar. The recently published reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the State of the Climate in Latin America and the Caribbean are compelling. In terms of the impact of climate change, Latin America is projected to be one of the regions in the world with the effects and impacts such as hurricanes, heat waves, reduced crop yields, forest fires, and the depletion of coral reefs will be the most intense. FAO studies show that in developing countries, the agricultural sector absorbs an average of 26% of the damage and losses caused by medium and high intensity disasters, and 80% in episodes of drought at the global level. This in a context in which COVID exacerbates the conditions of vulnerability for these events. Facing this challenge will require a formidable effort of institution and digital innovation. In this webinar, we will focus on digital technologies that have the potential to catalyze the transformation towards a more resilient agriculture in the face of disaster risk and climate change. We will explore the tools that underpin them, their use on potential applications, and learn about practical examples in agriculture. I would like to now extend a very special greeting to our guest today. First, Edgar Barroso, who is an innovation expert and a PhD from Harvard University, who leads the Entrepreneurship and Transformation Lab at the Monterrey Institute of Technology. Secondly, Mr. Jorge Gutierrez, an expert in agroclimatic risk management, climate change adaptation, coordination of the CAEP, Climate Action Enhancement Package of FAO Colombia. Thank you very much for being able to be here today. To all participants who are joining us, we are broadcasting this event in Spanish with simultaneous interpretation into English through the FAO YouTube channel and from the websites that we share in the transmission channels. At the end of the transmission, you will be able to register your data to obtain our certificate of participation in the link that we will share through the transmission channels. Follow us through Twitter account at FAO Capacitación using the hashtags hashtag risk management, resilient agriculture, online FAO conferences. Next, I would like to explain the dynamics of the webinar. We will start with a brief introductory video in which our colleague Roberto Sandoval, a specialist in disaster risk management and emergencies at the FAO Caribbean Subregional Office, will give us an introduction to the topic. Then we will have two presentations of 15 minutes each by Edgar Barroso and Jorge Gutierrez. Edgar will talk to us about smart digital technologies that can make a difference when anticipating and responding to disasters and what we can expect in the future. Jorge Gutierrez will then delve into the topic by sharing his experience of using drones to facilitate the assessment of damage and losses in the territorial level as a response to disasters in Colombia. To conclude, the panelists will answer to a round of questions from me and from you, of course, the participants. We would like to invite you to leave your questions in the chat during the course of the presentations. We will begin, therefore, with the words of Roberto Sandoval through the following video.
We have also seen familiar and unfamiliar hazards affect our agriculture communities. So the hazards and risks that we have been facing the past years are indeed becoming more complex. Sometimes they even occur at the same time and interact with one another. And so this increasing complexity and interaction of both climate and non-climate related hazards established the need for innovative solutions to help agri-food systems become more resilient and sustainable. So we need innovative technologies and tools that will help us better understand increasingly complex agri-food system risks and challenges, and perhaps develop cost-effective, efficient, and scalable solutions that will increase their resilience. New tools and technologies can help advance DRM in the agriculture sector by helping institutions and communities better understand disaster risks and impacts and make better decisions. For instance, agriculture officers can use a combination of satellite imagery, such as from Google Earth, which we are all familiar with, and drone imagery to measure the areas affected by floods. The same set of information can also be used to identify areas highly vulnerable to future floods. And experience from other countries have also shown that providing communities with access to these modern images also increases their engagement and ownership of the DRM process. The use of satellite and drone imagery can be a game changer. A hexacopter drone can map up to 100 hectares in 30 minutes. Imagine that. It would take a team of experts several days to gather data on foot over the same area, not to mention the risks that one can encounter while walking around, going up a mountain, or crossing a river. These tools and technologies bring robust scientific information closer to everyone because they are increasingly becoming user-friendly, cheaper, and have intelligent features that help users confidently interpret the information. For example, thanks to artificial intelligence, we now have mobile phone applications that can automatically identify crop pests and diseases, drones that can avoid obstacles automatically, and websites that can analyze very large amounts of information with the click of a mouse. If we harness the power that new technologies give us and use them in a responsible manner, we can help improve decision making that could in turn better protect agriculture, production, and people's livelihoods.
Bueno, espero que hayan podido escuchar correctamente el vídeo.
I hope you were able to watch the video and read the subtitles. It certainly shows us how digital technology have this enormous potential to reduce disaster risk through forecasting, mapping, and modeling in real time a variety of hazards, natural hazards, of course, phytosanitary risks, zoosanitary risks, socioeconomic risks, informing and connected with early warning systems. They are increasingly at the top of the agenda for policymaking. The civil society, public and private sector, national, regional, and international organizations, including FAO. This is precisely what our next panelist, Mr. Edgar Barroso, will be talking about. Go ahead, Edgar. You have 15 minutes. I will let you know when you have completed 12. Thank you for being here with us today.
Feliz de estar con ustedes como siempre. Voy a compartir mi pantalla. Preparé algunas cosas para esta presentación.
I have prepared some things for my presentation. Looking at the video, I'm pretty certain that Jorge's presentation is going to be quite spectacular. It's going to be very interesting that all this digital process, in order to anticipate threats or to manage risks and to be able to respond to disasters, has a lot to do with new technologies. And I know that for many of you, sometimes these new technologies are somehow removed from us. I said, well, I have not studied IT, or I have not studied a specific career in computing. What I'm trying to say, though, is with this introduction, is you're not alone. I studied music myself. I come from the world of arts. You can see my guitars there in the background. And little by little, I started interested in technology based on the arts. And I started getting involved in technology. What I'm trying to say is that technologies on the 21st century digital technologies in all these areas are going to be crucial for the evolution of any organization. For example, an organization like FAO. No one can deny about this digital migration that we're seeing in the world. First of all, we dematerialize things, we digitalize things. Like in the book, it says to become digital. It says that we're not living in the world of atoms, but we're living in the world of bits, that mostly everything is being transferred to one media to the other. Books, for instance, those who still enjoy from physical books, most of these books today are being produced digitally, and so many other things were only interacting thanks to this digital world. We're being able to carry out this conversation actually from different parts of the world. So all of these technologies that Roberto had mentioned so well, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all these terms, you will be listening to them very closely, blockchain, large volumes of data, Internet of Things, satellites, and the list can go on and on and on. The only thing that I would like to communicate in this lecture is to sensitize that these technologies are here to stay. And all of us do have an opportunity to use them. It is not exclusively for people that which study the career of engineering or are experts on the topic. In many countries and projects where we work, there's always this fear of saying, well, I'll know a little bit of technology, but not that much, but the world is advancing so fast, so all of this information is so important for my work. So on any industry, digital technologies have been extremely present. These examples that we have seen of drones and all of these technologies around drones, because it's not only the drone itself, but we have satellites and the capability of mapping and be able to distinguish so small little variations of the land. And even on some systems, there's also the capability of detecting how much a building will collapse at a millimeter level a year. So the accuracy that we have managed to obtain with these digital technologies is impressive. And it seems to me that at the same time, it opens up an entire world in order to discover issues of agriculture and resilience. So all of these technologies, and all of them, this is one of the most important features maybe of this historical moment, is that all these technologies have one thing in common, and this is the use or to generate or they manage or they need data. Data are extremely important, and sometimes it gives us a little bit of fear because we do not have a mathematical background. I told you I come from the music world. We see notes. Although there's a mathematical component, the truth of the fact that the important thing is to start falling in love of the data concept. Data is that part that feeds up all of these technologies. I'm pretty certain that Jorge now will expand more on that. How do you manage information? How do you distribute information? Who receives that information? And where do you store that information? And that historical information every time an event takes place. The negative side of these technologies is that there's an enormous inequality. While some countries or some organizations use data in a very robust manner for decision making based on evidence and large volumes of information, other countries still or other organizations still do not have that power of these technologies in order to extend our intelligence. It's not necessarily that the human being is going to be definitely substituted. Nonetheless, these technologies can somehow replace in a certain manner our brains and those engineerings developing these techniques, they need that input. Those who have not studied the hard side of engineering, they need sociologists, they need economists, they do need farmers, producers, they need all these people with a different baggage, a different type of experience to understand really well what is it it's being trying to achieve for the case of before, during, and after a disaster, to understand really well and which is the main status of for the people who are living those situations. The good aspect is we have structured information, and technology is enormously advancing. Having structured information before, it was very difficult. Today we have many sites where you start seeing that culture where data they are becoming a very important part of the organization, how to manage information, and subsequently how to manage knowledge of that organization is one of the most valuable aspects that we have. Just imagine all the knowledge that we have in Latin America about how to deal with a particular situation of disaster or emergency, or how we can be more resilient. The problem is that it is all distributed but not integrated. So what helps us to understand from IT and data is that it helps us to integrate that information and to look at it from different angles, because all the problems are going to face on these topics are going to be extremely complex. The bad thing, the goods and the bads, the bad thing is that we do have ethical dilemmas. As Roberto mentioned in the videos, if they're used correctly, all these technologies, they have great potential. I think that independently from our approach and our role in FAO or any other organization, we need to become familiar with these issues. And the good news is that there's so much information and so many communities that can really help us to integrate these digital technologies. Digital technologies, little by little, besides all those traditional tools like Office and the rest of the tools. But you already start seeing how we can obtain information, data, digitalize them at a digital level. So why is all this so important? First of all, it really helps us to strategically designed and well-informed. If we don't have enough information, it's very hard then to decide where, for instance, what we saw on the previous video, if you don't map the land in front of a disaster or emergency, hardly enough you're going to be able to decide without that information. The problem is who receives that information and how that information is received in order to be useful. Secondly, extremely important in order to evaluate results and identify opportunities. We may implement a program, we might have an event on time, it may be something good, something bad as a disaster, but we need to understand what happened, what was before, during, and what was the result in order to learn and to have a timeline of experiences. We also need data to be able to understand our history. This is why it is so important then that countries should generate these databases so we know how to deal with a specific situation in the past and how we can improve more and more on time. It also helps us to identify new patterns and new narratives. For us to be able to organize ourselves, it's a lot easier if we start from data and IT information, not only based on beliefs or some sort of intuition. We need hard data to make sure that we have seen this before in the past years. So this is going to be an input for dialogue. Information is extremely important to have more productive dialogues. No doubt, and I will just give you an example here, the world or the worlds that we're facing now do have a component of complexity. Human capability of human brains is extremely powerful for some things, but for other things it is not. One of them, you cannot manage a lot of information at the same time to make mathematical operations and not even computational calculations. That's why we have computers. We have invented computers, by the way. So that technology at the end of the day is a real help for people. And it helps us to understand problems that it would be impossible. I will just give you an example here. It's to have like a large volume of data seen in a more or less understandable manner, and as well as concepts or public policies. And the narrative can also help to elaborate public policies. You can really evaluate results, identify opportunities, to have predictive capabilities up to a certain extent, and more these computational models, artificial intelligence and machine learning, is allowing us to predict with more accuracy, more and more. And all these models will improve depending the quality of information. And this is where we can all participate. For instance, we have a concept which is called citizen science, where everybody can upload information, even though it's extremely simple. In the pandemic, for instance, we can say, I have the flu, and press a button. And that button, you upload it to the server, and you locate people, how many people are getting the disease, and you need to do something about it. So that's why in data and information every single day save an enormous number of lives. Beyond you like it or not, technology or data, the truth is that we may see it from the point of view, more practical point of view, technology helps to save lives every single day. And today, there's so many databases available, public, in order to train algorithms or to see what's behind that database. You should really try to explore this world of information, digital technologies, so you can evolve and integrate them to what you really need. When we look at a large volume of big data, I'm not going to go into technical aspects, how much is the big data or small data, but what's most important of having a lot of information is to be able to have that information, small, valuable information that comes from a large volume of data. It's important to know if I need to evacuate or not. That's the real important data. But in order to reach that robust data based on previous trainings and on large volume of data, we need to train those methods as well. Just to give you an example, social networks. It seems to me that we all have social networks here, or more or less. I don't know that everybody, but many people. Now, let's think about social networks. When you look at your friends and you have an X number of friends, right? But you don't know what's the meaning of the networks behind your friends, but facing a situation of disaster where you lose communication or you are unable to check with them traditionally, what we can do is visualize this information with very simple things, which has been done like platforms as Facebook or specific applications done by some governments. So then how do you see this? Let me show you really quickly a representation of social networks that can be useful. So on these networks, you can see a lot of data and they have a color. As you can see, this is a social network, very well known with public data, and we have a people here with dots, and with the color that you have, you can determine in which situation that person is, whether I am in danger or I am safe or I am neutral.
Ahora que nosotros lo podemos visualizar en redes, podemos ver patrones mucho más fácil que simplemente ver la red social tal como está. Entonces, la idea de los datos no nada más es tener
the idea of the data is to have numbers and tables, but also to have our digital world and know it from the inside. It allows us to see what's invisible. Sometimes you can't see it because if you go closer, you see the names, the people, and you assess how red it is. And you can determine how complex the situation is for many people and where people are centralized. That is, what are the nodes with highest amount of connection so that they can communicate with other people. So data and information, I'm going to exit here, allow us to have a view of everything we have. Edgar, sorry to interrupt. Can you share the screen again? I don't know, something happened. There we are. Okay, thank you. You have to share a full screen. Thank you. So, for example, what helps us, the data helps us, is to see what's invisible, what we cannot see, what we cannot understand because far away, it's difficult to access. There are great many tools that allow us to implement these technologies. One of the most common ones that we've seen specifically for this field, and you probably know, it's Cobalt Toolbox. It's relatively simple and very powerful tool, which allows you to do three things. On one hand, you can build forms instead of doing them by hand to assess, for example, certain states of the soil, of the infrastructure, of the people, and so on. You can also collect data or collect data and information that's online and offline without having necessarily to be online. And once that data is there, you can visualize them and analyze them and manage the data. This is very important because it allows us to understand and have a better understanding of things that we cannot see, but rather through information and data. I'm not sure. I hope you are not affected by what I'm saying. How can I make this as useful as possible? I'm going to do something that you are told never to do in a presentation. You have to have a great deal of information, but thinking that the information and the data is one of the most important motivations to enter into the world of technology beyond a case-by-case situation. I only have 15 minutes and they're no longer 15 minutes. I'm going to leave this presentation with many examples in how you can use Cobalt Toolbox, how it's used in before a disaster, before an underground, so that you can experience it before an emergency or hazardous situation so that you can see them, you can review them. It's a small description of what each one of them does. And all of these have a component that does not necessarily need to have code or to have a great deal of technology to be able to use them. There is a tool that's being used. It's much more intuitive. There's more and more interfaces to connect to other areas. So here we have the control of plagues and detection of plagues, which you can use. It's not like I want you to go one by one, or what I want you to understand is there's enormous amount of possibilities and applications and tools that are available and ready to be used by you, by each and every one of you. This is finally a platform that does not need code knowledge. For example, you can have artificial intelligence information. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to say that with these models, we understand everything about artificial intelligence, but certainly it helps us to step away from the fear that technology creates in us so that we can communicate with experts all over the world that allow us to collaborate with other disciplines. Because one thing I am sure of, emergencies and hazards and resilience and disasters are events that require interdisciplinary knowledge. Technology is not gonna resolve it by itself. We're gonna resolve it as a community. After that, in the case of disasters, for example, or hazardous situations, this is a very beautiful example of how some drones can also help to build very strong constructions after disasters, or 3D information that it's a video that maybe I can say, I don't know how much time I've used. You are at you have 2 more minutes. Okay, I need 2 more minutes. Thanks. There are examples, for example, in the collective function of technology. This is a call for code 2020. We're working with people that are not necessarily knowledgeable in technical aspects, but that can propose new solutions for the impact of hazardous and weather-based reactions. We're all part of the narrative of data and technology. Technology is not only for specialists in technology. This is for each and every one of us, and it should be involved in our organization, in the field, small scale producers, farmers, and so on. What I wanted to say today, and I hope that we can continue talking about technologies, and we will now go to the Jorge's extraordinary presentation, which I'm sure is going to be excellent. Thank you very much, Hector. Very inspirational. And I really liked this standpoint that you have given us, this fan of options and these new tools, technology, digital technology that have the potential to facilitate the transformation towards an agriculture and food systems that are more agile, more resilient, that allow us to respond to threats and the response to climate change. There is no doubt that the viability, adoption, and scaling of these technologies will require a favorable regulatory environment of entrepreneurships, of investments, and of new alliances, skills, capital, and investments in new partnerships. Next, we will be listening to Jorge Gutierrez of FAO Colombia, who will be telling us about his experience using drones for post-disaster damage and loss assessment. Go ahead, Jorge, you have 15 minutes. I will let you know when you have used your 12 minutes. Thank you very much. And thank you, Edgar, for that extraordinary and inspirational presentation, which makes my path easier to present. As you all know, our task is geared towards generating complementary information and strengthening losses, loss assistance and assessment and post-disaster damage. We are losing a great deal of information and data, and this is the invitation that we would like you to remember, that we need to be pending about the information. And these are the technologies, digital, geospatial innovation for data. This has been taking place now, understanding where we stand. You can tell your mobile, one mobile, tell another mobile, I'm communicating, I'm here in case we get lost, but we can also talk about the gaps. Not everyone at this moment in time can carry out this kind of process, and we're working more and more to close these gaps. Just to give you a context, these technologies are of geospatial digital innovation, have different technologies that allow us to provide different data, as Edgar was mentioning, with new information, with all of this interaction on spatial aspects, because this is very important and this is where we are progressing. I want to say that when we talk about focalizing or specifically centering ourselves on the importance of reinforcing the national capacities, FAO has been calling on the hand-in-hand initiative, which through a platform that it's already on the webpage. For those of you that are watching this webinar or that will want to check it afterwards, it identifies these 5 major points to support people that are more vulnerable, to make sure you scale it to understand the sustainable development goals, the SDGs, to provide the information, and of course the partnerships. We want to have the importance of reinforcing domestic information. We will see the different scales to improve the analysis. And specifically, another area that I'm very interested in is that this digitalization of agriculture, to visualize the data, which was what my colleague was saying, and to strengthen these relationships on local requirements. More and more, we have the presence, this digitalization of agriculture. Those that are active and passive, the contact, the proximity, the digital agriculture improves the methods that are conventional. And through this information, we can improve the manner in which we analyze and the speed in which we obtain the information that is precise. One of the most important challenges is to understand the flow, the information flow at the different scales. This is the agriculture to understand, and that is knowledgeable of the loss and inundations, but others to channel the risk and adaptation of climate change at the municipals. And to integrate this information is one of our major challenges, because as we've stated, it is there where we find the largest gaps. In Colombia, we are working to strengthen this loss and damages. FAO has been building blocks of information to progress with drones, obviously, and also loss and damage analysis. We have analyzed in Colombia where we can strengthen our knowledge. And I would like to mention some data here. 72% of the municipalities have low capacities, medium to low capacities, to strengthen themselves and face the climate change. The agro and livestock industry absorbs 23% of the damages and losses when there is a natural hazard or caused. And from the 2008, we invested 0.34 of the GDP in the risk management office. So if these losses for 2030, we will increase by 0.15% of the GDP. And this is where we're focalizing our attention. This is an emerging topic. The case of the drone technologies that began in 1850 with aerostatic globes and the development of aviation. Afterwards, the technology that allows us today to have the development of drones below 250 grams, and also to message all the First and the Second World Wars, generate information that is technological in profile and today is adapted for processes, in our case, in the agro livestock industry, where we're able to manage a variable analysis, topography, monitoring of crops. We have the information, as Edgar mentions, we can assess if a building is falling by 1 millimeter. This is all based on precision topography. We can monitor the evolution of crops, as I said before, map the lands, monitor the variables, respond to emergency, and with digital models, of course, survey and obtain data. This development is in the strengthening of this process, which we are assessing in the loss and understanding that this is the most impactful areas of the crops that we have seen up to now. Exactly the same for Latin America and the Caribbean. We have determined that there are major losses, and I would like to mention which of these events extreme temperatures, drought, flood, and so on, this is where we should be working. And it is important because here we have the problem of water. The agro industry requires 51.3 of the available water, but there are other problems of drought and flooding. I would like to mention on this slide that for every dollar that the country invests in prevention, we save more than $7 in the reconstruction and hazard response. To maximize these technical financial resources will allow us to have a better management of our land. We will now go on the case of drones.
In the previous years, so the system we are developing right now, satellite, community, and as well as development tool in order to collect information at a producer level, we understood that this case would be quite useful in case of flooding in the El Dorado municipality. This is a district here in red. This is a meta department that comes right to next to the Andes Mountains. So it's part of Piedemonte and the valley. And that little dot is El Dorado district, that which reported the highest number of losses because of flooding. This is a small little village, but nonetheless, you can realize that the river is right there. The Ariari River is quite close. You can see, and the crops are very close to the river. Understanding the dynamics, this is exactly what happened. Just for you to have an idea, this is a banana, producing banana mostly. So here we have several issues to reflect on. Where do you place the crops? But the farmer also needs to understand when the river floods, all this area of nutrients will favor future crops. So have been debated. This is also a perspective from Google talking about that information. This is the valley where the river flows. You can see the river is growing, but right next to the right of El Dorado, this is where crops take place. All these are mosaics are full of crops. So then we realize that from the names themselves, there's also a relationship with the river. All these sidewalks or divisions within the municipality were used to be called island, just for you to have an idea. These points are geo-referenced. So one of the main concerns here is what type of hardware in this case, or what type of drone to use. So we wanted to make an exercise identifying information. We selected this fixed wing drone with a higher speed. These drones have sensors. These are the eyes that capture the information. Information to be processed at a later stage. It also allows us to have a greater coverage. So what you do then is you program that flight with different types of software which are available. Some are free of cost, others do have some cost. You can start managing these images and identify which are the best options to identify this information. 3 more minutes. Okay, so this is a lot of field work to identify coverage, to validate the information, and then to begin to generate these orthomosaics. Drones begin to fly, and we start gathering the information through the data generate and different type of indexes. Here you have the results. So it was quite interesting because we realized that with this type of information, and also as well as understanding which is the area affected dot by dot, we were able to identify which areas that you have here in red had a higher presence of flooding. the areas affected quite specifically in the 3 pilots, what you see right here, and then which were the lands, particularly which areas, the type of crops, as well as the rest is just information processing through the software and quantification. That's also important to measure how many hectares, so that what type of crops. In this case, if the effect due to flooding, and finally economic assessment to see how much this information is so important as well. Whether being subvalued, for instance, comparing with what was done without drones. Without drones, it was 27.3% a year, but we reduced up to 60% with the information taken by the drone. For the future then, future work possibilities on climate change, what you see right here to the left, it's a banana crop area, and only changing the sense of the crop with reference to the river, we can have an area with no damage. So in the future, definitely this is territorial planning, right? Using that type of information, we are able to, we conclude that this is a very good possibility of managing all these instances to adaptation to climate change. So then conclusions, final conclusions, gradual knowledge of technology to be used by producers and governments, and multi-factor participation. Challenges and availability of technology, crucial on-site community calibration as well. We are have less uncertainty, the will of the municipalities, cost reduction, and no doubt strengthening all the capabilities. I just wanted to share this experience that we've had with you through drone technology, strengthening damage and losses. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your presentation, Jorge, and for explaining this experience, which very clearly shows how technologies to capture information through tablets, through drones, can really help and gather information, and how all of that can really allow us to estimate the level of damage, to make economic calculations of losses and damage in the agriculture area, and how that at the same time can report for rural planning and different management strategies for risk. Now comes the more interesting part. We're going to be able to talk to our panelists and answer questions from the public. We're going to start with a round of questions and responses, and then we will questions which the participants are sharing through Twitter and YouTube. So I ask the panelists, please respond in no longer than 2 minutes to cover different topics. The first question is for Edgar, and it is related with a concern that we are actually seeing. Several participants are identifying that concern. How do we ensure that all of this goes in benefit to family agriculture? So those who not necessarily have access to this technology. Edgar, the question is, how then can we prevent that the use of digital technologies will make it even with enhanced inequalities of those small farmers, a small scale and more modern agriculture, are more intensive in. No, but that's a great question though. And somehow we're trying to solve this. It seems to me one of the most important things here is to talk about this issue, to socialize it, to understand it, to see the needs that we have or possible problems that this inequality may bring of lack of access from the small farmers, which is digital exclusion. On the other hand, it seems to me that the governments and organizations need to understand that we need at least to have coverage for that collectivity so that at least everybody can have access to these internet networks in one way or the other. And what's most important is that all these decisions which we take how to implement these technologies should always have a part of inclusion. Like what you said a minute ago, entrepreneurship and high technology on the other side. You need those three pillars to include people. On the other hand, to develop well-advanced systems to have more accuracy in the assistance of technology, and on the other hand, to apply that technology. That technology is not only with digital learning, but also I learned because now my area is more productive because I can prevent some sort of disaster before, during, and after. So it is very important to talk about this, to try always to promote a connectivity and inclusion agenda and never forget about this. And on the other hand, I think we're facing here the greatest need of training people and humanity. And that we need to pay a lot of attention to that actually, training.
Muchísimas gracias, Edgar, por tu
Thank you very much,
respuesta.
Edgar, for your response.
Vamos a seguir con una
And we'll
pregunta
continue with
para mi
I have another
colega
question here
Jorge.
from my colleague Jorge.
Jorge, la evaluación de daños y
Jorge,
pérdidas.
losses and damages evaluation through drones. I understand based on your presentation, it is just one of the tools contributing to this national system of damages and losses from Colombia. Which are the others and how this technology, drone technology, how do you relate that with other pillars of the system of losses and damages in Colombia?
Cómo todo esto se aterriza de
And how
nuevo
all of this
del productor, del
comes
beneficiario.
down to the producer, to the beneficiary, to family producers.
Claro, es bien interesante porque
Okay, very
justamente
interesting because it takes precisely goes back to the initial question of scaling. So with producers, we exactly want to work with that local scaling, where we facilitate actually through technology data gathering precisely so that the mayor, for instance, or producers or associations can really manage this information as soon as possible. But in the country, additionally, we're also working in other scales. One of the most important things we have invested a lot of efforts actually together with the different partners and the Ministry of Agriculture is to establish
evaluación de daños y pérdidas
a
que es
damage and losses evaluation tool, which is multi-scaling through some software development. We have identified which are those gaps of things that which were done very well in the country and data gathering, but also where things, this flow of information could be optimized or improved. So very soon we will conclude this software development from the producer to the governor, the mayor, risk managers or the minister, for instance, may have on real time access to that information through this software development. I think it's very robust, but that's not all. We also are using a system that FAO is developing. It's called Axis of drought evaluation. This type of evaluation, as Anna mentioned, one of the points is the most severe droughts. We're starting seeing now the mega drought concept in these countries. So Axis, what it allows through satellite information is to allow a very specific follow-up on crops which are jointly validated with producers. And on a 12-day cycle, it generates updated information for decision maker. So this is what we're doing. We're starting with very important pilots.
vincular
We will relate this line of work, actually. And finally, what happens with the communities and those areas that do not have this information or have very low communication, that don't have Wi-Fi, access to Wi-Fi. So here we have another community development of damages and losses, which dialogues with variables, and that's part also of the process, which variables which are can be homologated to this system, variables which are being gathered within the cost of productions and the areas, the crop itself, stage affected. You can homologate this to different tools. So it was allowed through decision making through some sort of uh, device, they can be informed on real time, but at the same time to dialogue, open up for dialogue with the different scales. So don't to avoid too much time.
Muchas gracias, Jorge. Gracias por explicarnos esta
Thank you, Jorge, and thank you very much for explaining this to us about different scales and how all of this is combined in just one national system of damages and losses. Now we'll just go to questions from the public, but before that, I have a question for Edgar. Edgar, I see that you are extremely updated on what's coming for the next years in the area of technology. So we have to ask you, in the next 5 years, what contributions can we expect from digital transformations? Resilience of the agricultural system and challenges, multiple challenges that the agriculture is facing. Global change in global warming, social economic cycles, and changes in biodiversity, how the next 5 years we can use all of these digital technologies to face these challenges. And most of all, how can we, those who don't have a better experience, how we train ourselves?
Una explosión de tecnologías digitales. Creo que no hay un solo gobierno.
In the next 5 years, we're going to see an explosion of digital technology. There will be all sorts of governments that will be investing in this. People will be with access to internet and information. The next 5 years, particularly in Latin America, we're going to see a very strengthened network, which is what I hope, of course, that more people will have more access to internet and information. And this access to information will help us enormously as far as the resilience to have what options I have, what do I need to have the capacity to recover, to be able to be resilient considering a complex or a negative situation. We will also see a culture that is going to understand data and information. Information is going to be much more digestible, if you will. There will be more visualization. There will be more interfaces. So in fact, we're already seeing this, but in 5 years' time, the use, for example, of artificial intelligence, for example, of model of GP3, which is a processed in national language, you will be able to talk to the machine and you have a useful response as we would do today with Alexa or other types of integrative technology that you will see with humans, between humans and machines, to be able to take on the challenges, gigantic challenges that climate change is bringing. Like any other technology, of course, there's an utopia and there's an dystopia. As everything that would be very bad is if this gap grew even larger in the next 5 years, and we would leave people completely in another synchrony. And I hope that this notion of technology as an extension, kind of an assistant that will help you to enter new markets, to be better crop, to yield better. This is going to be already integrated, and I hope this takes place in the next 5 years. Thank you very much, Edgar, for this vision of the future. It's very interesting. we are going to be very much linked to that chariot of digital knowledge. We will get on it. We will see some of the questions from the public now. They're very related to what Edgar was telling us, this culture of data. So let's see now. Jorge, maybe you can help us to answer some of these questions that come from the public. The question is, what technologies or tools have been identified to face the problem of access and availability of data, Jorge, from the standpoint of the obstacles that are faced by the agro industry with low economic resources, family farming, very little access to technology. How can we take on this problem of availability and knowledge, and how can we facilitate their lives? That is exactly one of the gaps and one of the main challenges we face, because there is an asymmetry there. Of course, we don't all have this availability, but we all have around us data and information. A farmer, for example, knows or follows, for example, the climate, the weather, although the climate change and the variability is there, right? So one of the main challenges is to know where the information is located. For example, in many of our nations, there are entities that provide information on early warnings, or in our case, we are strengthening some groups on agroclimatology. So what we do is strengthen this relationship between that which is regional, so that we understand where the data is and where's the information and how can I participate with that information. Also, there is a user, but also a generator of information. So when this flow and dialogue takes place, and there's a face to this, we have seen it during the pandemic, and this has been very useful. I do want to mention also the youth. Youth understand more and more that this technology, because it is their own language, they understand the easiness of being able to enter this area. What we are observing is that data and the flow of information will depend on the interest. If we motivate our youth, for example, our farmers, our emerging farmers, not to leave the rural life, to strengthen the agro industry area, the technology is a very good pretext. And this is when you start closing the gap. There's also an issue of cost. There are curves of development, of course, that talk about drones. Having a drone 4 years ago had a completely different price than it has today. They're much cheaper. There's access to information. And this is very important, the strengthening of skills and capacities. But also we must understand what's coming and how this miniaturization of technology and the lower cost will help us. This will help them understand how much and how helpful this is in their own territories. Thank you very much, Jorge. And thank you very much for mentioning this matter of costs and prices. Effectively, all these become concrete, and that we have the benefit at the level of the family farmers and producers. It will imply an investment, public and private investment, that is under development, and it will imply that there will be work that will require collaboration between science, public policies, and society at large, the demand of the society at large, not only the effort, but also the demand. I wanted to ask Edgar, and it's very related to some of the questions we're receiving through the YouTube and Twitter channels. What type around, for example, can we imagine to ensure that everything that we're observing has a landing from the producing side? What are we going to need? What are the conditions? What will make it available? What kind of collaboration do you foresee? Okay. What we have to do, and this is a decision that is going to be determining for the society, is the capacity that we have not only to collaborate, but systematically rather. If we don't do it in a systematic manner, we're going to make an effort here, and we're going to do another effort here, and then each person is going to work in their own niche, doing the same thing and repeating it. This is a moment that is very important to understand and have a strategic view at the region, at the local, and at the continent level, and a system by which generates this information for the population that will train people, because it is part of the culture, because by itself it shall invest and understand that it has to invest in its region, and it has to reach the smallest family farmer. So it is very important, but we have a lot ahead of us to progress at the regional level. We need centers that will manage knowledge in a more effective manner, because, for example, if we have good practices, they have to be documented through an example. The good practices are not statics, they evolve. You need to have an archaeological analysis of all this so that you have more input for decision making. What I believe is that it's not only a technological aspect, it's also a human situation. We have to agree. We have to agree on things that are difficult sometimes. So what I would like to see in the next years to come, a leadership that will group and empower and activate more than in methods, that the method itself or system itself by design will allow these aspects to take place in the region in a distributed manner. I'm talking about a systemic more than a methodological, should help us to understand the complexities. You cannot resolve things with one way of doing things. You need an ecosystem that will allow you and support different players and different variants in its behavior, but it also acts in its own self and enables. Thank you, Edgar. Maybe, Jorge, maybe you would like to complement the question that I asked Edgar. What would these conditions, institutional and political public policies, will allow innovation not only to be possible, but rather permeate all the different levels of society, that it is accessible and it has to be scalable. Can you complement what Edgar said? It should enable and empower. Without a doubt, the systemic aspect is very much something I agree with. We must work hand in hand and in parallel to visualize these efforts, and in these moments, in decision makers and so on, in the agro livestock industries, the effort of $1 invested for 70 avoided, let's say. If these investments and these decisions are made, and where should they go when you're planning? We begin to managing already existing policies, because these policies are progressing in our countries. With these new development lines, we can therefore begin to come to agreements and say, if we plan these innovations, digitalization of agriculture in a medium to short term, and we start monitoring with the different scales, with each scale of producers, whether I'm small, am I a mayor, am I a planner, I'm going to see what are the benefits. And this is where the situation lies. But we have This is taking place right now as we speak. So the line of work is to optimize what we have and identify very quickly what the gaps are. There are many initiatives at the international level will allow us to strengthen the situation when we see, for example, the ticks, when we talk about our cases with agriculture, these dialogues that are taking place at a large scale with that visibility, with that planning, so that we can identify very quickly a very quick decision. Many of our countries have the effects of La Nina and El Nino, and this in a few years, we will have these cycles occurring again, and we have planning of, for example, of drought or flooding. This happens all the time. If from these investments and the efforts that we have already made, we take the path of using new technologies and digitalization, we will find that very quickly they are functional, because the error is to think that they are not. Thank you very much, Jorge. We have another question, which is very interesting on behalf of the attending public. Today, we have seen the potential of digital technologies in helping in monitoring and information of hazards, whether of disaster or agroclimate. However, we know technology can be an important support, not only for solutions in productive areas, but to improve natural resources, and also to contribute to broader agendas linked to supply chains, value chains, market, nutrition, production, responsible responses. How do you see the potential of digital technologies in this SDGs 2020 and sustainable development?
The technology, I mean, all of the objectives, just one, you might think one more than others, because some of them are precisely focused on innovation. But I agree with the concern. I understand that it's very difficult to select one, because technologies are very useful for many things. This is why in the lecture, I focused a lot on data, because the computing thinking, actually, any problem or any challenge that you may bring to computing for an algorithm, it's the same to solve one problem and to identify patterns in a chain of production or the value chain or any type of information. Machines are machines. These are all numbers. And we can use them to obtain a result. This is why I would insist that one of the main things we need to do is to try to bring that information to people, as how to transfer this information, bring it to the people, because there's a power here of changing my life, because thanks to this information, I'm allowed to make better decisions. Therefore, I can produce more, I can be safe, and so on. So it will be, I cannot select actually one, because there's so many technologies out there. Some of them are just being developed, but I have to select by force one. I would say people. I would say to people, please try to look at your computers, your mobile devices, your tablets as an instrument of information and dissemination of information. It seems to me that that is the first step. We still need to have a more like a culture based on information. And based on that, we're going to be able to trigger many, many things, programs, technologies, innovations, and all of the aspects. But it is important, though, that data and information are available and people know, we all know how to use that information in order to improve the life quality of our surroundings.
Muchas gracias, Edgar.
Thank you very much, Edgar. we always go back to the issue of culture, or data culture, and how that information is useful to generate evidence and to facilitate decision maker at all levels.
A ver si te parece,
Let's
tal vez
see if you want to respond to one of the questions we already received from the public, from the participants, and it's about which is the role of the Academy of Science
está en el desarrollo e
in
implementación
the development and implementation of these technological applications, and how the Academy relates with other players, basic players.
Claro, creo que lo primero que pienso en
The
los
first thing that comes to mind in academic exercises is that there's a neutrality concept that is quite important. And also within the development of technologies that diminishes costs. So within the initiatives, the engineering labs, for instance, so those that are working on the material, they dialogue more and more in their theses. It doesn't matter if it's a PhD, in that interdisciplinary work. And it's much better solved that holistic type of vision. So great developments, and I would like to bring in the concept of spin-off done by these labs, this think tab of the private sector and productive sectors are those that really generate these emergencies of technology. For instance, I will talk about 3D impression for drones to reduce cost, or free software developments
equiparar a quienes no tienen los
to
recursos para comprar.
bring that access to those who don't have the resources and licenses, which are reducing costs. So the role of social transformation of the academy is evident, and sometimes producers don't have the idea of this closeness. For instance, these universities that do have careers,
Esa idea y ese puente establecido.
sometimes they do have that bridge, but others that don't. And that's a great invitation, actually, to understand that solutions from the academy will allow that neutrality for development, that sometimes in the territories, it generates a lot of questioning, like the private company and what's the interest of the academy. The academy might be neutral on that.
Ayuda justamente
And it helps precisely to solve these problems in different scales. That's the other important issue. Well, thank you very much, Jorge. Okay, I say with that sentence then of relationship with the academy to neutrality. Maybe one last question to close the seminar. And for Edgar, what happens with intellectual ownership of the data generated, and which policies have been generated in the region to guarantee the public use? How that was, it seems to me that you had categorized it in the bad side, if I remember correctly, at the beginning of the presentation. In the ugly part, or something challenging, something that you categorize it like that, the intellectual property. Precisely. I work in the academy, as Jorge said, and just try to have an open and neutral mind. It seems to me that information should be open as long as possible, not always, but as much as possible, or to make releases of certain databases which are public. But it's also an issue of individual decision. If you generate data, you have that intellectual ownership on that data, depending how you have obtained that information. That's another big topic. You may have those databases as intellectual property, or you may share them. It seems to me that at least the universities and the governments and most of the civil society should contribute a lot to that data openness, so that more people can use this information. Maybe we're not that sensitive yet, with the fact that as long as we have well-structured databases that will allow to train well algorithms, all situations, that has a lot of value, training value for algorithms. So precisely, thinking about your previous question also, the truth that the academy should arrange, organize all this knowledge in order to share this later. But doesn't mean that everything is open. There's also intellectual property that needs to be respected. And eventually, when you make a work, you need to have certain gains. And if you are in the private industry, and that's legal and it's valid and it is desired. So there's a balance. But if we have enough public information and data, so that we have this balance within systems where are open systems that you have to pay, and we always have an option to continue to learn. That's the most important thing of all, and precisely this is where the universities play a very important role as safekeepers of this information that should be, from my point of view, as open as possible.
Y si me permites, Ana, y no
And
nada más
if you allow me, and not only open, understandable open. Look, people can really understand. You can provide databases, but if you create those interfaces to be easier, user-friendly, easy to use, and easy to understand, to have an impact on the environment and the lives of people, that will be ideal. And this is what we should really achieve. Thank you very much, Edgar. And thank you, Jorge. We're just about concluding our webinar. And what I can really rescue from this conversation, and we cannot emphasize enough, is how crucial it is the promotion of a facilitator environment, allowing equitable access. And to create this environment will require to apply a proactive approach that fosters that public-private cooperation within the academic world precisely, and research institutions, as well as international institutions, the private sector, the public sector, and the users themselves, the users of these technologies. Only then we will be able to ensure that small agricultures and small micro companies and other territorial players can benefit from these technologies. And they themselves should be the promoters of these type of systems and rural territories, which are more productive, more sustainable, and more resilient. Thank you very much to our distinguished guests, Edgar Gavarroso and Jorge Gutierrez, for your time and for helping us to understand opportunities and challenges that present this world of digital technology. It is really a motivation to explore more, to learn more, and a wide range of possibilities, technological possibilities for all of us who are involved in rural development, to be able to contribute so that agriculture and agricultural systems, food agricultural systems, are more sustainable, more resilient, and more inclusive, most of all. Thank you very much to all of you, all the attendants, all the participants, for the active participation on the webinar, those who have followed us in the social networks and our website, and this conversation. We have had connected more than 1,000 people on different platforms. Thank you very much to everybody for being with us today. And we remind you that next webinar of this series will be the webinar called of Alert to Action to reduce risk and mitigate disaster impact. This will be done the next September on the 27th at the same time. Thank you very much to all. Have a very good afternoon and a very good weekend.